And we're live. Good evening, everybody. My name is Bri. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to tonight's B-List Book Club, the final B-List Book Club for 2020. We begin tonight, as we always do, with an acknowledgement of country. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Where we are here in Sydney, that means Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. And we have a real life event tonight, but also lots of people watching from elsewhere. So if you're tuning in, if you're tuning in, I encourage you to think about the beautiful culture and language and history. The oldest living culture is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and culture. And when I say I acknowledge that we are gathering on country, what I also acknowledge is that sovereignty was never ceded. There has not been a treaty, and I support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I would also like to begin tonight's event by just taking this opportunity for the people who are with us in person, who are loyal B-List attendees, and for everyone watching elsewhere. I personally just want to thank Sam and Marcelo and the rest of the State Library of New South Wales team. As well as our viewers, we've all really come through 2020 together. And tonight's event being both in person and online, if it works, which I hope it is and will, this is the new format going into 2021, which is so exciting for a whole lot of different reasons. It's exciting for me because I get to be here in real life with my guests, and I get to be with you, the attendees, and we get to talk afterwards again, which I've really missed. But for all kinds of accessibility reasons, for physical, geographic, and financial accessibility reasons, having these events for free is just, in my opinion, that's a state library really walking the walk. And so I would just like us to put our hands together and thank Sam and Marcelo and the State Library team. Now to tonight's book and conversation. We're talking about Upturn, A Better Normal After COVID-19. And I'm really thrilled that we can talk about this because my motto for December and moving into New Year is pragmatic optimism. And it's great to be able to have a conversation about that. It's a collection of 30 different essays by a whole lot of different people. The collection is introduced by and edited by Tanya Plibersek, who joins me now. Tanya is the Shadow Minister for Education and Training and the Federal Member for Sydney. During the 45th Parliament, Tanya held the position of Deputy Leader of the Opposition and Deputy Leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party. She was previously the Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Development in the 44th Parliament. In government, she was Minister for Health. Her other ministerial appointments have included Minister for Medical Research, Minister for Social Inclusion, Minister for Human Services, Minister for the Status of Women, and Minister for Housing. Tanya lives in Sydney with her husband and her 3 children. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming her tonight.
Thank you.
I'm very excitable because this is, as you would have heard, this is the
Getting
first...
out and about.
Yes.
Real humans.
Yes, absolutely.
It's nice, isn't it?
Thank you so much for making time. I want to get right into it because the book goes in a whole lot of different directions, and we're not going to be able to talk about all 30 essays, obviously. But there are some basically that I really want to talk to you about.
Sure.
To open, though, in your introduction, you reproduced a part of an essay that the amazing author Arundhati Roy had written for the Financial Times back in April called "The Pandemic is a Portal." Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. How did you feel when you first read that piece of Roy's in April?
Well, I'd already started to think about and plan the book, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should really read this," and sent me the Arundhati Roy essay. And I thought that was a magnificent quote, but the essay itself, if people haven't had a chance to see it, is really worth looking up because it's this description of what happened in India in the early days of the pandemic, almost instant. So nothing, and then very short time frame, for a complete lockdown, and hundreds of thousands of people stuck in cities with no means of support, no way to get home, walking hundreds of kilometres with no food, hostile reception along the way because people thought they were bringing the virus with them from the big cities, and I guess in some instances they were. So it was just this compelling nightmare scape of what was happening in India. And I thought the 2 points together, the contrast between what we were, for the most part, doing in Australia, which was following the medical advice and trying to look after each other and trying to cooperate across political lines, across federal and state governments. And I thought that was a quite moving and important thing to understand. And then just that last paragraph, it's towards the end of the essay, made me think about all of the big junctures in Australian history and global history, what we've been able to achieve. Like you, I've been kind of doing a book club with my colleagues, my federal parliamentary colleagues. This year we've been reading a bunch of non-fiction books that are important books that have been released in recent times, like Rosgano's Superpower, like Jess Hill's book on domestic violence, like Rebecca Huntley's book on how to talk to people about climate change and change their minds. But one of the books we read for book club, and we've been talking to the authors, of course, afterwards. One of the books we read was Stuart McIntyre's fantastic book, The Boldest Experiment, about what happened in Australia after the Second World War. The Australian population had sacrificed so much. They had faced the Depression. Almost before they could draw breath, there were people off to war. So many died, so many came home wounded, so many people at home sacrificed in different ways. But from that, we built a better Australia. The government said to the population of Australia, we'll try and do two things. We'll aim for full employment and we'll aim for higher home ownership. And I thought that was so that idea of a portal to a better world after this terrible upheaval really appealed to me.
That was a question I had for later, actually, that a lot of the pieces in this book reference World War II and the end of World War II. Can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, things we want to emulate and mistakes we want to avoid in terms of it being the most recent, just like huge shift?
Yeah. Look, I think World War II is almost incomparable in terms of the suffering and consequently people's desire and optimism for something better. Like there's obviously so much celebration when the war ended, just because the war had ended. But even before the end of the World War, the Australian government had started to think about what kind of peace will we build. And I suppose that's really what I wanted to do with the book. The health crisis, we hope, is manageable now. I don't think it's fair to say it's over. It's certainly not over globally, and I don't think it's fair to say it's over in Australia, but it's manageable in Australia. We need to, just as the then government started to plan for the peace, we need to plan for the economic recovery and what kind of society and what kind of economy we want that comes afterwards. And World War II, I think, is a really apt comparator because of the size of the dislocation and because of what we've asked of people in terms of sacrifice. That we have asked people to give up their jobs or close their businesses, maybe lose their businesses, to protect the health of others. And for the most part, people have done that. And, you know, there's examples of bad behaviour. We saw the kind of toilet paper skirmishes in the supermarket aisles, and we saw these, you know, unbelievable people who think that filming themselves being rude to Bunnings staff, you know, it's their human right not to wear a mask.
They're outliers.
Tiny examples like that. But honestly, did you ever think that we would be housing thousands of rough sleepers in the short amount of time that we've done it? Did you think that we would have rent relief and mortgage holidays? Did you think kids could move almost overnight to remote learning and that teachers and principals and schools could facilitate that? If someone had said to you, we want to do one of these things, most of us would have said, no, that's impossible. And in fact, I mean, you know, when we set a homelessness target last time we were in government, when I had the housing portfolio, the incoming government got rid of the target because they said it was impossible to reduce rough sleeping in the way that we wanted to.
The goal for that was 2020, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. All it took was a worldwide pandemic.
That is glass half full.
Yeah.
That's glass half full. For those listening at home, you didn't hear the interjection, which is, and you did it. Yeah.
A positive heckle. Thank
Yeah.
you. You mentioned that when you read Arundhati Roy's piece, and that came out in April, I mean, just to remind everyone, which I had to remind myself, I mean, that was when things were really intense in terms of an overlap between reaction and things that we had to do. We had to lock down, but still a real lack of knowledge about COVID-19 and what the rest of the world was going to do. So, I mean, you mentioned that you had already started thinking about putting this book together. Maybe can you tell us about when the idea for this book came about then, and how you decided to sort of, I guess, herd these cats?
Well, things changed very quickly in my work, like they did for a lot of people. So Parliament stopped, and we were, I mean, I've only just started having street stalls again, but you know, the way that we contact voters, public meetings, a whole lot of that changed virtually overnight. And I was home more than I have been in 20 years, probably, like actually having dinner with my family and all that normal stuff. And having just that, I suppose, challenge of trying to understand what was happening in our community, what was happening in our economy, and what would come next. I just took the time to ring a lot of people that I like and respect, who I think are interesting thinkers in all different areas, and the book club was part of this process as well, to get them to talk about how they saw the health pandemic, you know, being resolved or being contained, and what comes next. And as I was having those individual conversations, I was thinking, it's so selfish of me just to ring and have this conversation with this brilliant person and not be able to share it. So I started ringing people
Again.
with the conversation in mind, but also, and by the way, if we did a book, would you do a chapter for it and have this conversation with a wider group of people? And really that is the purpose of it. It's not a prescription. It's not a manifesto. It's actually supposed to be a way of getting people to think and talk, examine the issues, think about the sort of society and economy we want and how we build towards that.
I want to start talking about some of the specific issues now. I want to start with finance first, and a kind of really big sort of overarching question, which is that, I mean, we have the coalition government who typically are really focused on getting back to surplus, back in black. Like, the reason we can't spend this money or fund these programs is because, like, we're so close to getting back in black. And now we are in a huge amount of debt, and the financial stimulus worked, or is in the process of working. Oh, yes.
We'll see. Yeah.
I mean, can we have hope for a new rhetoric? Like, is this, do you have hope for a new rhetoric beyond this sort of thinking about government finances as all a matter of black or red?
Well, I always thought that the debt and deficit disaster rhetoric was so misplaced, and, you know, Tony Abbott running around the country with his debt truck. When we were in government, we borrowed money to keep people working during the global financial crisis. We kept 200,000 people working, and at the same time, we upgraded schools, we upgraded community facilities, we built new roads and bridges. I built 21,600 new public housing homes for people, and it was the right thing to do at the time. Tony Abbott ran a really, really effective scare campaign about that. about the debt and deficit disaster. But then when the Liberals came in, they actually doubled our national debt before COVID-19 hit. So there was already a bit of flimsiness to the narrative, the debt narrative. And now we're going into unprecedented levels of debt. You'll still be paying for it in years to come. So the question is not, should we borrow? We should borrow. Money is cheaper than it's ever been. We should be borrowing to keep people working. The question is what we spend the money on, what kind of jobs are created, what kind of infrastructure we build. So we've gone straight to a government saying we'll spend up big on hard infrastructure, and that's good. It's good to make our cities and our towns more livable.
And utes.
And utes, yeah, we've got to have lots of utes.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing that we should be focusing on. We should invest in those things, not just the super big projects, but also the smaller projects, the community hall upgrade, the TAFE college spruce up, the things that will make life better for people. Absolutely, we should build things. We need to look beyond that. We need to look at employment in caring professions. If we learn anything from this pandemic, it's that the people who do the frontline work in a whole lot of caring professions are underpaid and undervalued, and there is enormous demand for their skills right now. And there are so many examples of that, but just take one. There are more than 100,000 people on waiting lists for home care that have been assessed as eligible as needing care. They're eligible. We've got 2.4 million people who are unemployed or underemployed, and we can't get it together to employ any of those people to do any of that caring work. We need to be prepared to invest in those jobs. It is an investment to look after our community properly. We need to deal with energy prices by making sure we've got cheaper, cleaner, renewable energy, more of it in our grid. And that gives us the opportunity, as Roscano and others point out in the book, to be a clean energy superpower with a manufacturing base. We can actually be making things. So building things, making things, employing people in caring professions, and making sure that the jobs are permanent, are decently paid, have good paying conditions, because that confidence in our economy, that knowing that you're going to have a paycheck next week and next month and next year, if you do the right thing, you'll still have a job tomorrow. That isn't just good for the individual. It's not just good for their souls. It's actually critical to our economy. One of the big problems that the Reserve Bank points to and business leaders and international financial institutions is we had flatlining wages before COVID-19 hit. Without increasing wages, you're not going to have people spending. You don't have consumer demand. So we need to build things, we need to make things, we need to care for people, and the jobs have to be secure and decently paid jobs to support aggregate demand in our economy, to support consumer confidence, to make it possible for you to buy a cup of coffee when you're going to the train station tonight and not worry about the $5 you're going to spend.
Continuing on from that and taking it even further, we've just seen the 5th food delivery driver killed in Australia in 2 months. During lockdown, a lot of us were patting each other on the back for staying home, doing the right thing and staying safe, getting our things delivered. And I think one of the things we can all agree on that COVID revealed is that essential workers are not remunerated in ways that reflect how grateful we are for the work they do. What are we going to do about the gig economy? What's a better normal after COVID-19 in that regard?
This is such an important question, Bri, and I'm so glad you have asked it, because quite often people think, well, the technology has enabled this, so we have to make use of the technology and things have changed. And I welcome a lot of those changes. There's a lot of great things about life being more convenient, being able to call for this or order that online. But it has to come with protections for the people who are doing the work. And the delivery riders that have lost their lives, it is such a tragedy. Honestly, you'd read the life stories of the people who are doing the work, who have been killed, the family they've got depending on them, quite often they're here as international students or on some tenuous visa arrangement, and their employers are literally saying to them, you're an independent contractor, I don't want responsibility for your pay and conditions and protective gear and all the other stuff. I don't want all that hassle. So you're an independent contractor. And then they say, and here's some work, take it or leave it. But if you leave it, that's it. There is a complete imbalance in bargaining. So we need our industrial relations laws to reflect what great new technology enables. Our industrial relations laws have to keep up with that so that workers have the same degree of protection and safety, basic things that every Australian worker should expect. And we need to have bargaining, a more equal bargaining and a complaints mechanism for those people who are being treated badly by their employers. Where do you go if you're a delivery rider and someone's treating you badly, your employer's treating you badly? What negotiating power do you have? The Transport Workers Union have done a brilliant job at trying to highlight these issues even before these 5 tragic deaths. And it's appalling that it's taken this, so many deaths so quickly for people to start to turn their heads to how do we manage, what do we do?
There's an overlap there too in some of the research I've seen that shows that even the last 4 years, we're not seeing any improvement in the really crappy, often work conditions of international students.
Yeah.
That there's just this huge group of people who basically have no complaints mechanism.
Yep.
Who do they go to? What's the process for them to try and get help?
Massive underpayment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Chronic.
I'm struggling to remember the numbers off the top of my head, so don't quote these numbers, but it was something like 45% of international students were earning less than $15 an hour. Like, it is appalling how badly, and it's not just international students, it's a whole lot of people on different forms of temporary visas. And that's really one of the things that Jenny Macklin writes about. She says that low-paid workers have been exploited as an economic management tool by the government. Like, really low-paid workers are the way that government has kept cost of living increases down, and they are, she describes them as economic cannon fodder, and then they're blamed as well. So if they lose their job and they're blamed for that as well. It's no surprise that wages are flatlining when that kind of exploitation is possible in our industrial relations system, right?
Well, 3 of the pieces in here, one by Wayne Swan, one by Sally McManus, and Linda Burney's as well, they all use this word dignity or dignified, that people should be able to retire with dignity, or that people who are searching for jobs should be able to live with dignity until they find that work. What does dignity mean? What does it mean to you? And what does it mean financially?
I think in a nutshell, it means being able to look after yourself and the people you love, and knowing if for some reason you can't, that we've got your back as a community. We've got your back, not as charity, not as noblesse oblige, but because it's your right as a citizen of this country. And it really makes me think of my dad. My dad was a plumber and gas fitter. He worked at Qantas for more than 20 years. And remember, he would bring his pay packet home on a Friday. And Qantas, for those of you who don't know, doesn't pay great unless you're the CEO or something. But
then it pays really great.
And he'd stop on the way home. He'd buy a box of fruit at the Bates Drive fruit market and a little treat for each of us. And we'd get our pocket money when he got home, and the little treat that he'd bought for us. And then he'd take his petrol money for the week, and he'd hand the rest of his pay packet over to my mum for housekeeping. But it wasn't that there was a lot of money in our house, but it felt safe. It felt regular. As a kid, I never had to worry if I said it's for school. We could afford the excursion or the new pencils or whatever. That feeling of security, not worrying, not. And I see people now who come into my office who are trying to get by on old New Start now job seeker, and that they are always worried about how they're going to make it to next week. And I just don't think that's fair in a country as rich as ours.
I want to move on to talking about education. Kids who were already struggling at school are now even further behind. Can you talk a little bit about that absurd imbalance and how we could possibly try and help them?
Yeah. This, I think education is both one of the great success stories of COVID and one of the great potential disasters. So schools did just so brilliantly in getting kids to do remote learning. If people didn't think that teachers were the best human beings on earth before COVID-19, a few weeks at home with their kids doing their lessons remotely probably convinced them.
I don't have kids, but I remember when that moment hit and there was just this like ripple through society, like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm never talking to a teacher that way again.
Yeah. So, and things like Zoom PNC meetings, and like there's a whole lot of homeschool communication that's been great. And we've got, 10 years improvement virtually overnight in that. But for kids who were already struggling at school, this has been the worst time. So the estimate is that for every, say, 2 months of remote learning, those children have lost a month of progress. Their rate of progress has essentially halved. And this is against a backdrop where Australia already had one of the most unequal school systems in the world. So how do we fix that? Well, we kind of know how we fix it. We know how we fix it. We make sure that the very best teachers are at the front of the classroom teaching kids. We've had, actually the Victorian and New South Wales governments have both said they will pay for small group tuition to help with catch up. Those fantastic teachers need to be properly supported to have small enough groups that they know every student individually. They can work, they can pull kids out, help them catch up. Teachers themselves have the opportunity to, throughout their teaching careers, continue to upgrade their skills, to be supervised, to collaborate, to supervise others. All of this is pretty standard stuff. What we don't have is the funding commitment to do it. And that's what needs-based funding was supposed to be all about. Sector-blind needs-based funding was supposed to be about providing teachers and schools with the resources they need, more resources for kids who need more help. More resources, it's simple, isn't it? More resources for kids who need the greatest amount of help. We haven't done it. There's other things we can do. We need to spend more, sure, but it's how we spend the money. We can, improve initial teacher education. We can use research much better in the classroom. We can stop doing what doesn't work, do more of what does work. All of that is really important. But giving schools the resources to help the kids who are struggling catch up, giving schools the resources to help kids who are gifted and talented actually be able to. Some kids really liked remote learning because they were flying at their own pace and doing stuff in the rest of the time that really interested them. Why do we need to go back to a kind of industrial type of education that says every child learns at this pace and they're studying the same thing at the same time? We've learnt that we don't need to do that, but all of these changes mean teacher time, which means money.
To talk to us a bit about childcare, I was interested that in Annie O'Rourke's piece, she just mentioned right at the beginning that Peter Costello and now the Treasurer as well want a baby-led recovery.
Yeah.
And as a woman who's coming up on 30 who does not have a baby, I feel like lots of politicians are looking at precisely people like me, saying like, why aren't you making babies yet? And I'm like, childcare.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really that simple.
Yeah.
And the modeling we have, I feel like we've been seeing about childcare, is that it would have colossally positive impacts on productivity, on
Yep.
what's
Well,
what's
it's
up with
just a
that.
no-brainer, right? Yes, and that's why one of the commitments that Anthony Albanese made in his budget reply speech was a $6.2 billion commitment to massively reduce the cost of childcare. We don't want anyone to say no to day 4 in the week of work or day 5 because it costs them too much to go to work. And so many families find themselves in the situation now that it doesn't make financial sense. We say for both parents to work full time. We know what that means. In the bulk of families, it means dad will keep working part time and mum will go to 3 days a week. That, of course, not every family is the same. I'm not being narrow-minded about that. I'm simply saying that
It is what it is.
if you measure unpaid caring hours, domestic work done, it is predominantly women, predominantly mothers doing it still. We can. I mean, there's one report that suggests we could unlock $10 billion extra GDP if we got this right as an area. And guess what? There's jobs in it too. So every $1 million extra we spend on childcare is 8 jobs. So it's not just great for the parents who are able to work more hours. It's also important for the people who are then employed in early childhood education and care. But yet again, let's make sure that those are properly remunerated and properly respected roles in our community.
Annabelle Crabb, I want to talk about Annabelle Crabb's piece in here. So she's recently written the quarterly essay, then it's been a little bit extended, I think, and come out as a book called Men at Work.
Yep.
I feel like the piece she wrote was sort of like tempered optimism, because of course, when everyone had to go home and work from home, I feel like somebody with her like her background in research and thinking about these issues would have been really keeping an eye on how that changed the sort of, for those families who do have a nuclear kind of mum, dad,
Yeah.
and children set up, how now everyone working from home would change the split of labor. What was your thinking when you first read her essay, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it sort of, in a nutshell, men are doing more domestic labour, but women are doing much more domestic labour during lockdown, right? So they've picked up the slack a little bit, but there's still, the bulk of the extra work, and there's a lot of extra work at everyone being home during lockdown, was done by women. Look, I think Annabelle is hopeful that men get a better idea. Again, we're talking in cliches, forgive me for this, but she's hoping that people who have previously worked long hours, had long commutes, have that time at home and are better able to engage with their kids and do more and realise the value of that work a little bit more. That's all good if that happens.
Do you think it will happen?
Look, a lot of my women friends who are in that nuclear family sort of situation, and I have discussed the fact that our male partners have often found really absolutely vital frontline work that they have needed to do, locked in a study quite often with the kids running riot through the rest of the house and the women trying to do their work and supervise remote learning and do all the other stuff as well. So I would have to say my real life experience of this in my conversations with people is that it is the rare person who has who's really cracked this 50-50 at home nut. But it is vital that we do it, because women will never achieve, well, I hope I'm wrong, but women will never achieve full equality at work when they're still carrying the bulk of the domestic burden as well. And for men, I think there is such great when they when they really dive right into what it is to raise and care for children, they'll realise that it is phenomenally rewarding work as well. That there's a lot of reward from the love and labour that you give. Anyway, I hope people get that over time.
I just want to remind anyone watching at home that I will be taking questions both from the real life audience and the virtual audience, and you can type those into the Q&A function at any point in time. But I do have more questions of my own for you. June Oscar's piece on remote communities and First Nations is the first piece in the collection, and it's phenomenal. And she specifically calls for a commitment to the Uluru Statement. What's your position on that?
100% support. I think it's terrible that as a nation we said to First Nations Australians, okay, well, what is it that you'd like in terms of constitutional recognition? And there was a large, complex, democratic process that
unprecedented
formulated the Uluru Statement from the heart, and there's a expectation of constitutional recognition, truth-telling, treaty, and I just think we can't really be an adult nation until we've accepted and resolved and incorporated that into our national story. We are so lucky to have 65,000 years of continuous culture in Australia, and it can belong to all of us when we really get treaty right.
We're heading into Christmas when many of us have the opportunity to speak to random uncles who might feel differently. How would I talk to somebody who has lingering either suspicion or confusion after Turnbull saying it was a third chamber? How do we, like, it just seemed like that did so much damage. How do we talk about how that's not what it is?
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking, really, isn't it? Well, it's a voice to Parliament, so it's simply the opportunity for First Nations Australians to say that law will affect us in this way if there is a differential impact. And why wouldn't we want to hear that? When we were last in government, at the bottom of cabinet submissions, there's a whole lot of things that you need to check. You know, have you consulted with other ministers? Have you done this? Have you done that? And one of the things is, have you done a gender impact statement of this legislation? Because the notion that tax policy or education policy or health policy is ungendered is just, of course, it's nonsense, right? So we do a gender impact statement, and the same sort of thing. You have to be confident that the laws we make as a national parliament actually meet the needs of all Australians. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that Indigenous Australians, when faced with the huge impact that legislative decisions in Canberra can have on their day-to-day lives in different parts of Australia, whether it's, Redfern in my electorate, or Walgett, or Cape York, or Bunbury, it doesn't matter where. The decisions being made in Canberra should be tested against the lived experience of people who will be subject to them.
I have probably my only issue with this collection, which is that to me a really gaping hole was no sort of meaty discussion about refugees and asylum seekers. And the subtitle is A Better Normal. Can people seeking refuge in Australia expect a better normal anytime soon?
That is a really good question. And I guess the reason I didn't look for a chapter on this is because I don't know that Australian policy will change that much. But globally, we are going to see huge changes in coming years. Before COVID-19, we had more than 60 million displaced people around the globe, and we at that time weren't taking enough people. We weren't, and we had dropped our foreign aid budget from close to 50 cents in every $100, not overly generous. We had dropped it to 20, heading down to 19 cents in every $100. So at a time of increasing global need, we were doing less. And we were shifting money. So we'd say, oh, we need to do more in the Pacific. We'll take money out of Africa to do more in the Pacific. Or we need to do more in Southeast Asia. We'll move money from the Pacific to Myanmar. And so in that respect, and also we still have about 150, just under 150 people in PNG that Australia put there, and about the same number in Nauru. The New Zealand government has been offering for years to give those people a new home. I cannot understand. I just think it's flat out stubbornness that the Australian government hasn't accepted that offer. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to get Australians home before any other migration happens. I think there's still about 20,000 Australians, 25,000 stuck overseas. So we've got a government that has completely failed to get them home. Once that's happened, once migration starts again, we need to have a generous humanitarian visa program. But we also need to be part of a global community that does something about the 60 million plus people who can't be at home for whatever reason. So that isn't just about a refugee policy. It's also about our aid program, and it's about support for an international rules-based order and an ambitious foreign policy position for a country like Australia. So just looking in our neighbourhood, there are so many things that are unacceptable, but one of them that really sticks out for me is the treatment of the Rohingya refugees in Myanmar who are fleeing for their lives from Myanmar. We have a role there. That's one example. I could think of dozens. We have a role there, and we have to have a foreign policy that says we have a role there as well.
Thank you. I have only time, unfortunately, for one more question for you before I want to leave proper time for audience questions. So please, everyone, bring your questions to the fore of your mind. I really liked Lenore Taylor's piece in here. Lenore Taylor is the editor of Guardian Australia. She talks about the sort of present and the immediate future of media and the media industry. She had these beautiful ways of speaking about how much people were willing to donate or subscribe to news when COVID hit, because people were obviously realizing how grateful they were for a variety of news sources. Can you talk a bit, I guess, about
and trusted news sources?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about I guess your response when you read Lenore's piece, and then also I'm interested in how that fits with Kevin Rudd's call for the inquiry into the Murdoch situation.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I love Lenore's piece, and she's saying very eloquently what I think probably what most people realise. We have to have a really well-funded ABC, in particular SBS. Our national broadcasters have to be properly funded. We've seen dramatic cuts in news and current affairs programming in the national broadcaster because they can't afford it anymore. Hundreds of jobs lost, all the rest of it. Obviously need to fix that. But on top of that, to have a diverse range of voices and views in the media, people have to be prepared to pay for it. So if it's free for a reason. And if you look at, you have to be prepared to pay for it. You don't have to be prepared. I don't mean you should go through a pay barrier every time you open a Guardian article or look at something online. But what I mean is, if you can afford it, donate sometimes. If you can afford to support independent media, buy the magazine, or buy the Saturday paper, or do what you can to support the people who are trying to provide a range of voices in our media ecosystem. Because if we all just think that's fine, I'm going to just read whatever Facebook or Twitter sends me, and I'm going to get a narrower kind of view of the world. I'll hear all the stuff that I already agree with. That way madness lies. That's actually one of the reasons I think that the American presidential election was so very toxic. There was no agreed set of facts for most of the time. So if you can afford to support independent journalism, as well as, of course, as taxpayers, we support our public broadcasters, please do it. Please do it. We've seen more than 200 mastheads, like local papers and local websites and so on, closed down, and it's not good for any of us. It's not good because you don't know what's happening in your local community, and it's not good because you don't get to make your own mind up if you're just being fed stuff by some Facebook algorithm.
And where does the Rod Murdoch thing happen? What's that?
Look, I think it's really important to have a look at media concentration in Australia. I think it's really unhealthy that 7 out of 10 newspapers sold in Australia are News Limited papers. But I'm not sure I needed an inquiry to tell me that Rupert Murdoch doesn't like the Labor Party. I think I read that already somewhere.
In 9 out of the 10 papers.
No, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right.
No, I think it's healthy to have an inquiry into media diversity, nevertheless.
Right, time for audience questions. So I'm going to scroll through the ones we've received online, and please, if you're online, keep sending them through so I can see. And in real life, Sam's going around, and remember, she's the only one that's allowed to touch the microphone. Please raise your hand. I'm sure there are some. Yeah, sure. Hang on. All right. Hi, Tanya. Is it time for a universal basic income? From Susie.
Yeah, we looked instead of a universal basic income at an unemployment insurance scheme in Jenny Macklin's piece, and a higher unemployment benefit in Linda Burney's piece. I don't think, I'm not as big a fan as the universal basic income as other people are, because I think one of the great strengths of our system is that the money goes to the people who need it. Like, I don't actually need a universal basic income. I don't need it. So for me to get it and pay more tax just seems pointless to me. I'd rather just pay my tax and make sure that someone who needs a higher unemployment benefit gets a higher unemployment benefit, or whatever other income support they need. But the principle that every single person has enough to live in a dignified way, yeah, absolutely.
So you would agree on the I guess the impetus, like the feeling that people want from a universal
I think the universal basic income is more appealing to countries that have a social insurance scheme where you pay in money and then you get out money. And so what they're saying is you shouldn't be poor because you haven't had the chance to pay in money into the universal insurance or into the insurance scheme. But our system, where in principle, if you need help, you get it, is a more appealing principle to me.
Next question is about something that I knew people would ask about, so I didn't ask about, which is essentially renewable energies and climate change. This comes from, hi, Tanya. Do you, capitals, actually think that Ross's ideas can be realised? Will there be enough aggressive reform to invest in renewable energy, build the accompanying manufacturing industries, and aim for full employment in the near future? Maybe could you talk a bit about his piece and then your
Yes,
response?
I will.
Yeah.
So Ross Garnaut's written a chapter that is a sort of consolidated version of his book Superpower, which is excellent. If people haven't read it, they should. And he's sort of making the case for investment in green hydrogen. So hydrogen, I think most people believe, will be a really important part of our energy mix in the future, not just in Australia, but globally. And we can produce it by burning coal, or we can produce it by solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources. And Ross is making the point that if we do it with renewable energy sources, it's not only obviously better for the environment, but it gives, and we get cheaper, cleaner energy to power our homes and power our businesses. But it also gives us this enormous trading opportunity, right? Because we can export the hydrogen as a fuel source, but we can also export the things we make with it. So European Union, UK, US, South Korea, Japan, they all want zero net carbon emissions by 2050. China has said zero net carbon emissions by 2060. They're going to all be looking for ways of reducing their carbon output in coming years. Things like steel manufacturing, aluminium, ammonia, cement, all of these are highly carbon emitting processes. If we could use green hydrogen to produce these things, we've got these fantastic markets globally, not just for the energy, but for the green products we make with the energy. The questioner asks, is it actually possible? Yeah, it is. It's actually possible. And I mean, the extraordinary thing is we've had 22 energy policies from this government. There's been so much uncertainty, blah, blah, blah. Yet we've now got about 2.5 million households who've got solar on the roof. Batteries are getting cheaper all the time. Wind and solar are already cheaper than coal and gas. They're only going to get cheaper still. We need to invest in transmission. We need to invest in storage and firming and energy efficiency. All of this is job creating when we do it. We've got cheaper finance than we've had, since anyone can remember. Why on God's earth wouldn't we be doing it?
Two questions here I feel are similar in their vibe of the thing. One is it goes through a list of things that seem to be no-brainers. So you and I talked about how childcare, yes, while it's sort of on its surface appears to be about potentially like a social issue, is obviously the modeling shows that it would be great for productivity, that renewable energy, as you've just said, has the obvious benefit of investment in there creating jobs, that social housing aids employment, that these seem things, the questioner has said these policies seem like free kicks. They have social benefits and they introduce the stimulus that we need, like after 2008. This person's question is like, well, what's the problem with them if they're free kicks? And the other person's question, which was similarly flattering about a lot of the issues we've been speaking about, was, is this a bubble problem? Is this a just sort of stuck in the mud two parties problem?
I think that it's a worldview problem in a sense, right? So I think Scott Morrison, Josh Frydenberg, the people who are formulating the next budget, essentially think if you can get business taxes low enough and wages, not to wages low enough and make it easier to hire and fire and do all of these things, that the animal spirits of the economy will just take care of everything else. All you have to do is take the dead hand of government off and let it rip and everything will be fine. I think that's basically their worldview. It's challenged a little bit by the fact that they've had to take this sort of Keynesian approach to pump priming the economy with wage subsidies and so on. But I think that is actually against their nature. And for people like me and for the people who are writing in, it does seem obvious that if you want to reboot the economy, we've got to build things, we've got to make things, we've got to care for people. And we've got to make sure that the jobs that we create are stable, secure, decently paid, so people have the confidence to go out and spend. Yeah, I can't answer why I can't answer why people don't see it as a no. Maybe if they read the book, they'd all be convinced.
That's how books work, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That's right. Fingers crossed, eh?
I have another question, which I sort of thought somebody else would ask, and I didn't get a chance to, and we're almost out of time. And please, if anyone in the room has thought of anything subsequently, raise your hand. What difference does it make for us over here that we're looking at Biden 2021 instead of Trump?
Oh, I think it's a huge difference. And it really goes back a lot to what I said about climate change. I think one of the most significant things that Joe Biden has said since winning the election,
because that actually happened,
is that he wasn't going to let countries cheat on their emissions reduction ambitions, and for us to use carryover credits from previous achievement. Anyway, you all know that that's just a big fat cheat. And I actually hope that it will prompt our government to say that we're going to get to zero net emissions by 2050, and this is how we're going to get there. I hope, because it's a significant trading partner for us. We look really lonely. Like, China has committed to zero net emissions by 2060. It's one of the largest industrial economies in the world. They've got a big challenge to get there. South Korea and Japan, all our major trading partners. We're trying to do trade deals with Europe, the UK. They've committed. 70 countries, in fact, more than 70 countries have committed to this thing that seems beyond us. So I think on climate change, it's going to be very important. And I think one of the things that I welcome most is a return to multilateralism. Having his fantastic new team say diplomacy is back. I just kind of breathed a sigh of relief at that
I feel like
notion
goosebumps.
that diplomacy is back.
Wow. All right, it is bang on 8 o'clock, but I will give the room one last chance. Are there no questions from the floor? Yes, there is. Okay, allowed.
All right. I was just wondering, in the view of the overall arching view of the book, has there been any thought, given what's happened, that we will have any change of legislation or the way the state premiers actually work together about like border controls, things like, that's the obvious. Is it going to be this bad next time, or are we going to actually learn something from this?
That's a really interesting. Do we have to repeat the question? Sorry, Sam. No. Great.
It is a great question, and it is. I'm thinking of all the gaps in the book now, because it is a gap in the book. I think people were so grateful at the beginning of the pandemic when state, territory and federal, Liberal, Labor, National, whoever was involved in the national cabinet, and they were just focused on solving problems, listening to science, following medical advice, having conversations instead of shouting at each other. It was just this like brief, perfect moment, right, in how politics, we wish it was like that. And it's pretty disappointing that we've gone pretty quickly back into cheap shots and opposition for the sake of opposition. I still feel like most of my colleagues have kind of got that people really liked it when there was a bit more, common sense and common courtesy in our national debate. I don't think we're going to sort of wholesale reform, the Constitution and which bits of government are responsible for which things. But I hope at least that popular, relief at courtesy re-emerging in our public discourse. I hope that stays a bit longer.
While you were answering that question, anonymous attendee added, "P.S. Can you please be Prime Minister soon?" with a smiley face. And I think we'll finish on that.
I think that was my daughter. That's why I bring her to these things. Yeah.
Can everyone please join me in giving Tanya a huge round of applause?
Oh, thank you, Bri. Thank you. Great work. Thanks.
Thank you. All done. Wonderful. First